See if you can spot when I transition into YouTube mode, guys. See if you can spot it. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Winter with a new community balance update. And since I've learned the best way to clickbait people is say things right at the beginning, first off, Protoss nerf Terran buff ZERG. We're gonna find out. I'm gonna break it all down. I'm gonna read through without commentary. First, we're gonna describe the changes. Then, I'm going to talk about the impacts each change will have, because it's essentially like finish your sentence and then we'll talk about it instead of trying to take each one step at a time. So the basics. Over the past few months, we've been tracking tournament results, following discussions around the TVP and ZVP, Terran versus Protoss, ZERG versus Protoss, and the strength of Protoss in general. I'm sure many people have strong opinions about that and do not hesitate to share them. But a mixed story. Overall, global tournament win rates have remained close, with Protoss even arguably underperforming in the WCS circuit. Accurate. At the same time, however, the most recent offline Korean leagues, which is literally only GSL, but that's one way to say it, have seen high Protoss representation. While the results might paint a picture of Protoss' strength, see where we're going, we don't believe they tell the whole story. Rather, what we find more concerning and what we are focusing on for our next update is how players view and talk about the Protoss matchups. I will stop here. I will hold here. Never say whining doesn't pay off. They saw you. Alright. In both TVP and ZVP, discussions seem to boil down about how binary either matchup feels. In TVP, while tank timing pushes feel strong, Terrans say they feel disadvantaged as the game progresses. In ZVP, while ZERG players struggle with scouting and responding to Protoss' various openings, professional Protoss often give feedback they're the ones who are disadvantaged in the late game. General rule, we believe it's perfectly healthy and even desirable that certain races have an advantage over others at different stages in the game. In an ideal world, all races would have different types of advantages at all stages, etc., etc. The concern is the current meta comes when players feel like there's a clear identifiable point early in the game when the advantage swaps from one race to the other, and the race that perceives themselves at the disadvantage feels they have insufficient options to disrupt this outcome. With these principles in mind, we'd like to test some changes on the testing tab, which all 6 of you will play, to gather feedback for a balance update. We'll be trying something new as we plan to release 2 sets of changes. We believe both sets could result in positive improvements, but as they are different aspects of the game, we're interested in your feedback before we determine the best options. The first and more experimental set of changes will be available tomorrow. Second set on July 15th. Tomorrow, July 2nd. First, Terran Stim Pack Research Upgrade duration decreased from 121 to 100. You might be like, why 121? Why was it that? Because we used to work on Starcraft time, which very short version. Originally, when Starcraft came out, the developers expected you to play on normal time, which is 1 second to 1 second. But the Koreans were like, get out of here, we're playing on faster speed, which was like 40% faster. So all the timings, like 100 seconds in Starcraft time, was only like 74 seconds in real time. But since in Legacy of the Void, we switched back to real time, the calculations are different. So we've seen kind of a trend of trying to get everything back to a round number, which isn't that big a deal. A few seconds here or there isn't going to drastically alter, but this is more than a few seconds. You can see the description here, of course, below, or you can find the link, but essentially this is supposed to give Terrans more options in early game TVP, or at least a follow-up TVP, without feeling like you're sitting there getting harassed all day by blink stalkers or whatever Protoss is hitting. Like, 21 seconds is not insignificant. This creates new openers that Protoss will have to account for, allowing Terran to more seamlessly transition from tech-based openings to bio-based mid-game, and most importantly, reducing the window in which the upgrade can be sniped. If I had $1 for every time I saw, or I had, or I personally sniped Stim with blink stalkers, I would have a not insignificant amount of dollars. That is, like, it's funny that that's really what we're looking at, but kind of, it is so common on so many maps, and it's such a risk. I feel like, I forget who it was, Puck, who sniped like 6 times on a stim? Of course. But is the mouse... Get the mouse off the screen. Winter, you're not professional. So, interesting. It speeds up the timing of combat shield. That actually will have some interesting repercussions in TVT and TVZ. We're trying not to touch TVZ too much. And now, wait. Halt! Oh, I said I'd just read them and then break it down. Okay, I'm gonna read them all, and we're gonna go back. I distracted myself. New upgrade, enhanced shockwaves. Increases the radius of the Ghost CMP from 1.5 to 2. I'm not a math expert, but that's more than it seems. Those of you who want to bring in the circumference and all that, that's actually a significant buff. It's not a little, it's a medium amount. So we received a lot of feedback. The TVP is perceived to favor Protoss in the late game, and a constant throughout, oh my god, is the raw direct strength of the late game Protoss army. So much more splash damage than a tsunami. But also shift the age-old zoning relationship between Ghosts and Templar a bit more in the Ghost favor. And by age-old zoning relationship, of course, Blizzard means every once in a while a Terran player landing an EMP and actually winning a game, and then the other 8 out of 10 times, the Ghost dying horribly, only EMPing Zealots. That's the age-old zoning relationship we're talking about. Our decision is to try to change this upgrade instead of a baked-in improvement. They don't want the strength of 3 base Terran all-ins. Fair enough, because then we'd be pulling the boys some more. Interesting. I didn't think about Ghost being on the table here. That's interesting. ZERG, infested rockets. That's only the anti-air. So a while back, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, that infested Terrans received a buff to their anti-air damage and range, which was significant. And they're essentially specifically designed to kill air. And kill things like interceptors and Vikings and even mutalisks. So slight damage decrease. Protoss carrier interceptor build time decreased from 11 seconds to 9. I mean, okay. This is mostly ZVP we're talking about here. And now here we're in the meat of it. Alright, Protoss players. Find your shoulder to cry on. Because here we go. Step 1. Nexus strategic recall cooldown increased from 85 to 130 seconds. That is many more seconds. While it's cool that Protoss can utilize strategic recall to reposition their armies between their bases, we believe they can currently do so too frequently, aka essentially whenever they want. This change is intended to punish Protoss. Wow, it was under 2 minutes before? I could have sworn it was 2 minutes. I did not know it was 85 seconds. That is actually a little ridiculous. This is intended to more punish Protoss players who are consistently out of position against multi-pronged harass. So that is a not-so-subtle buff, especially to Terran, but also in ZVP. You know those big Immortal... I said I'd just read it. We'll go back. Warp prisms no longer start with the... Okay, wait. I gotta... All my Captain Protosses out there. Warp prisms no longer start with the warp conduit passive ability, and warp-ins will take 11 seconds when not near a warp gate or nexus, up from 4. And then the gravitic drive upgrade now has the functionality of granting warp prisms the warp conduit passive ability. So, what is warp conduit? That's what everybody else calls super pylons. That's what allows you to warp in 4 seconds and not 11. Essentially, we'll just say 3 times as slow. And easily sniped. So, the base warp prism, no longer a super pylon. Nothing is being touched on the pickup range and micro potential, so your double immortal drops are still looking good. But the discourse seems to center primarily around the number of early game Protoss openings. Not only does Protoss have a high number of tech options, they have many variations of immortal all-ins, Here are my 3 favorite Immortal LN variations. 1 Immortal in a Warp Prism, 2 Immortals in a Warp Prism, or also more Immortals in a Warp Prism. Those are the ones we're talking about. Though we believe all these attacks to be theoretically defendable, the margin of error for the defender might be too low. In theory, you guys could not suck, but in practice, not so much. There are a few ways to address this, such as improving ZERG early game scouting and weakening some of Protoss's early game options. For the first iteration of the testing tab, however, we like to try a more experimental change and reinforce the concept of Defender's Advantage. Okay, so this is important to talk about in all Protoss matchups. So I'm gonna just cut. I've talked about how Warp Gate is the issue with the perceived strength of Protoss at every stage of the game. It's perceived, I'm taking their terminology, as strong, is because of Warp Gate. Warp Gate essentially negates the need for Defender's Advantage, and it makes it very difficult to buff gateway units, because gateway units are not just quick defensive units. They can also be on the other side of the map instantaneously with those warp conduit warp prisms. So that is why there's been such a struggle. Like, it's always so hard to, 1, with recall meaning that you can almost never catch an army out of position, and 2, with warp gate meaning that a dozen charge lots could be in your main at any time past the 5-minute mark. This is what players feel. It's not necessarily imbalanced, it just feels like mediocre design. So it appears we are finally addressing this to some extent. So, let us see the thought process. Defender's Advantage is a tricky thing to balance in RTS, as shifting it too much in favor of the attacker creates overly aggressive games. Meanwhile, shifting it too much in favor of the defender results in more total situations. I would argue that maps play a large factor in Defender's Advantage, obviously. Possibly more so than design. Just unit design or race design. But there's a lot of things at play here. Currently believe PvZ is in a state where the Defender's Advantage is not sufficient for the ZERG player in the early game. You're telling me. When scouting can often be limited to a Zergling running into the Protoss army exiting their base. Because of the short response time and the fast warp in, the sum of ZERG's Defender's Advantage may not be enough. So, thank you, Blizzard, for acknowledging me. Another example of low Defender's Advantage is the PvP Oh, PvP. Where both sides have access to similar reinforcement time with gateway units. While the defender has better access to Stargate and Robo, gateway units have become more powerful over time and thus better equipped to deal with low numbers of high-tech units. With these changes, we believe games are more likely to pass the 3-bay mark. 3 base, so the goal is to make it past 3 bases. This is important to note. I don't know if this is supposed to be for PvP specifically or in general. They're not very specific. It seems to be PvP only. But, interesting. Like, they're saying the intent is to get to those 3 bases. Once again, not incredibly clear whether that's specifically PvP or all matchups. For all these perceived benefits, so much perceiving. Perception is everything, though. We acknowledge this is one of the riskiest mid-year changes we proposed. So once again, we didn't even wait a year this time. Protoss, you're gonna have to just figure it out again, because we haven't yet agreed on. We're getting there, but we were concerned this change might be too heavy-handed and would overly neuter Protoss all-ins, and while this change more directly and obviously hurts Protoss all-ins, it also weakens macro play by both reducing the threat of potential attacks and reducing the strength of warp and harass. In PvT in particular, we also have concerns that this change could further push Protoss towards the already very popular Robotics Bay openers. Oh, I need to be making more Robo-Bays, is what they're saying. I have not been making Robo-Bays. What am I doing wrong? All these concerns notwithstanding, even if this change does not make the final cut, we think the value in spurring discussion within the community. We think there is value. We perceive there is value theoretically, in spurring the discussion within the community. We look forward in hearing, so close, what you have to say, not only about this change, but the entire package proposed today. Okay. Now I'm actually going to talk about it. So, STEM. Like, a significant decrease in time. So we have to look at all the changes together. Well, I'm going to go through each one in a vacuum, and then all the changes together. So this changes a lot. Now, here's the thing. The STEM timings are mostly locked by medevacs. It's not usually in most early bio openers that having quicker STEM is going to help particularly much. There are some, like, just straight-up barracks all-ins, but this is not like, there's going to be so many Marines. No, if they go straight into bio, pretty much you need medevacs, and if you don't have medevacs, it doesn't matter if they have STEM or not, because their units are just hurting themselves. So, in TVZ and in TVP, just going straight into bio, this is not going to be a serious change. What this will affect is if a Terran decides to open 111, get maybe a Raven out, or want to go for tanks or something, then STEM is not something you have to wait on as long, and it means you don't have to sit back as far if your harass fails or is eventually traded out. Like say you run Hellions into their base and you siege up a Liberator. This happens in like 40% of TVPs. You have a little bit less time where you have to sit back and just be like, are you going to Blink Stalker all in me? So this is an obvious across-the-board buff. It's going to also change TVT. I'm not sure how much, because TVT is still going to be just like Reaper Hellion, heavy tech, but we could see a resurgence of like some heavier bio play. Probably not, I think about it, but this is a pretty big buff. It's not huge. It's not like this breaks everything and now all ins are going to be so good. No. Without medevac, STEM Marines and Marauders are not that dangerous. Like, especially if you see any of them coming. But I think this is the big part. The transition where you don't feel like a bitch for like a minute and a half where you have nothing. And this is interesting. We've got the math on it. Plus 55% area on EMP. Because wait, Jimmy, do we have the technology? Okay. So what you do, we got like a circle, but now it's gonna be a bigger circle. So it's not just like a little bit, it's even more circle. And maybe it'll have a cool animation. I don't know. Because EMPs are a little hard to tell. I would like if EMP was a little bit more visual, like Storm. Not like Storm, but in a different way. Because sometimes it's a little tough to see where it's going off and exactly what it's hitting. So I would be on board with, because like a lot of the upgrades have a visual now, like ranged Phoenixes, Liberators, speed attack, Adepts, stuff like that. So I'd be down with like EMP getting a visual upgrade as well. It was hard to see in Broodwar as well. Well, guess what? This isn't Broodwar. Alright, this game has been changed more than one time in the last 2 decades. So the Infested Terran change. The Ghost change will have an impact on late game TVZ. Yeah, they say that. But not as much. Because energy units are not... Like, EMP is not the game ender like it can be in TVP. So, the nerf to Infested Terrans, I feel like they watched a little bit too much Grandmaster Battle Royale, and they're like, you know what? We gotta do something so it looks like we're nerfing ZERG. So, overall ZERG is getting nerfed or buffed based on the changes to the other. Nothing happens in a vacuum, alright? It just doesn't. You can't be like, well, ZERG didn't get anything. ZERG got plenty here. The carrier interceptor build time. What I would really like to see is a change from 11 to 9 seconds. Okay, but also, it costs 15 minerals for an interceptor. I think that seems a little high. Can we change that to 13? Blizzard? I know, it sounds like I'm penny pinching, but... So, when originally in Legacy of the Void, interceptors were 5 minerals, then they were 25, and then they were like 10 or 12, I don't know, and now they're 15. The recall, I actually really like this. I feel like both of these changes, and as a random player, and some of my best friends are Protoss, okay? As a random player, I think these two changes together will definitely shift a whole lot of things, and they might be too much to do together. Like, I wouldn't mind if recall took more energy, maybe, or something like that. As opposed to a hard cooldown. I guess that wouldn't make too much of a difference because you usually have plenty of energy in the later game. That's not a good change. Never mind, I take it back. I'm thinking a lot. I didn't think about this very much. I didn't even consider recall really when I was, because I've been ranting about warp prisms and so has everyone else, and this is the change most people have kind of agreed on. I think this will stick, and I think this is a pretty good change. Because RoboBay, like, getting gravitic drive is not that expensive, and getting a RoboBay is not that bad of an idea in almost any matchup. At most times, getting a RoboBay, if they have a ground army, is not a terrible situation, so it's not too far out of your way. I think, at the very least, this will stick. And then maybe we can have a discussion about the mobility of gateway units when recall, if recall is nerfed and stuff like that. But the big thing is TVP, like TVP all-ins. The way you take pressure off an all-in is you warp it on their side of the map. So I've been joking about make the warp prism the shuttle again, make Protoss Broodwar again, and this is a step in that direction where this doesn't nerf the strength of dropping 2 Immortals and microing them, or having Zealots in your Prism, or Templar. That's still going to be there. But the ability to warp in double-digit supply into your opponent's base and completely shift the balance and negate any defender's advantage does feel, and has always felt, I think even Protoss players, you can agree with this, has always felt, especially when Protoss players do it to you, it's felt like a gimmick. It's like, oh, well, guess the warp prism got in, and now I'm screwed. Like, But I don't know if the recall and warp prism change can happen at the same time. We might need to see. That might be a bit much, because they are right. Protosses are not doing incredibly well. Across the board. They're not winning an inordinate amount of matches at a level that matters. So if you're watching this, probably not yours. But the design could be improved, and I'm always on board with trying to improve a design so that it doesn't feel like, oh, I guess I just lost now. And this is where we seem to be now. So I would like, maybe, like, they haven't talked about the other changes yet. Like, there's going to be another post. This is just round 1, and the second set will be available. Like, I can't tell which ones are the first set and which ones are the second set, unless we haven't seen the second set yet. So, that, it doesn't seem to be clear here. Either. Like, is this just the first? If we haven't seen the second set, this is all speculation. Second part is 2 weeks from now. Is there... So... So these are the more experimental, and then there's like toned down changes. The second set is less drastic. I would be okay with like... I am a little worried about Protoss, like, before that 3 base that they want now. ZERG, any nerf to the Warp Prism, I don't think the stim change is really going to affect TVZ that much. Because the 2-1-1 is limited by medevacs, nobody is running across the map with a bunch of Marines. It's going to get a little bit tougher, but ZERG is probably in a decent place. Like, ZVT right now is probably okay for ZERG, and dealing with a little bit quicker stim is not going to change much. But I'm sure Terran players will have a lot to say, and ZERG everybody will have a lot to say. I try to be unbiased here, because I'm pretty equally terrible at all 3 races, and I watch a whole lot of Starcraft. And in fact, alright, let's do a quick summary, and then an even quicker summary. First off, Terran, some buffs to stim and EMP, to give them more options in the early and the mid to late game. ZERG, a slight nerf to infested Terrans to make it so they can't turtle as hard if they can actually use spellcasters without the Selecto Army Hockey. And Protoss, big nerfs to recall, the Warp Prism, and just general mobility and ability to negate defenders' advantage. So you have to be much more careful with your units, especially early on. Because if you get caught out of position, there's going to be very little coming back from that. So we'll see. This is the first set of changes of 2. Give me your comments, give me your likes, give me your subscribes. Not necessarily in that order, but what do you think? Is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? Are you just here so you don't get fined? We don't know. But my overall thoughts are changes in the right direction. I do feel maybe a little strong on the Protoss changes, but we don't know all of them yet. So we'll see. Thank you.